Hi, this is Joe Huggins with the Rocky Mountain Short Takes on Suicide Prevention podcast. Today I'm at the Bridging the Divide conference and talking with Dr. Ursala Whiteside, a licensed clinical psychologist and CEO of NowMattersNow.org. Hi, Ursula. I'm so glad that you could join us today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this field?
Yes, absolutely. So thanks for having me, and I'm really hoping that I can provide some useful information for, say, a clinician who is listening to this podcast and wants to know some of the research that may be useful for the work that they do. But yeah, why are you interviewing me, or what's my background? I am a clinical psychologist by training. I went to the University of Washington and focused on research, and really I focused on suicide prevention, mental health and addictions while I was in graduate school. And I worked with a woman named Marsha Linehan, who many of you know of, who are familiar with dialectical behavior therapy. So she's the developer of that treatment. So I moved out there in 1999, actually as an undergraduate, once I'd figured out the furthest you can go in psychology is to become a clinical psychologist. And it turned out I just loved research when I started taking my research methods class as an undergrad. So I moved out there and talked my way into her research lab and talked my way into having a full-time job there as an undergraduate, as both the clinical intake coordinator, so the patient coordinator, but also the coordinator of the therapist. So my job really was all around to see the day-to-day experiences of people who were at high risk for suicide, who'd had multiple suicide attempts, who'd fallen through cracks, and often came to us at the point where they felt like this was their last hope. So that was the environment I came up in. So being around these people, and then being around these staff, these researchers, these clinicians who were in this research laboratory, in Marsha Linehan's laboratory, who were so passionate about these people. And in that became this almost like a tribe where we were all in it together, not only us, but also our patients. But our job was to take care of them and to make sure that they were protected and that they knew that they were valued. And I have to say that was one of the most meaningful times in my life, because I was part of something bigger than myself, and we were all on the same page. You know, we were like siblings. We would fight here or there, but we all knew we were in it together, and we all had each other's backs. It reminds me of the show West Wing. That's a million years old, but I just started watching the episodes, and it's still actually perfectly relevant today and useful. But I start to cry sometimes while I'm watching it, because I'm like, that's how it was in Marsha Linehan's lab. Like, we were just in it together, and because it was so important to us, and that we were like brothers and sisters, and we had each other's back. And I really have to acknowledge a woman named Sarah Reynolds, who was a psychologist and a postdoc there, and who noticed me and said, why don't you come and do this, or why don't you come and do that, and recommended me for a paid job there. So the mentorship that impacted everything. So anyway, I kind of came up in Marsha Linehan's lab, and then I also completed my graduate school training at the University of Washington, with most of my clinical training being in Marsha Linehan's lab. So there I was a research therapist. So she had this trial that was ongoing, where we were working with patients who had multiple suicide attempts, and we were randomizing them to different interventions. And I was one of the DBT expert clinicians. So that was one of the powerful experiences of myself as a graduate student, both seeing my successes as a provider and my failures, and having that very well documented, because we were constantly being adherence monitored. So I learned a lot about myself. So that's a little bit about my background. Then I went to do my clinical internship, which is a year-long process at the University of Washington as well. And what I found was that these people who had come to us saying, this is my last hope, I saw them earlier in the process of things. I saw them when they showed up after a near-lethal overdose, and they were in the ICU, and they had just had their intubation tube taken out, and I was going to figure out how I could be helpful. I saw how bad the system was, this missed opportunity that our system had, this this place where we could have made a difference, and yet we didn't have the resources and the knowledge to know what to do. I mean, that's why I danced up and down when the Affordable Care Act passed, and when I finally had patients who were saying, yeah, I'm coming because I have this insurance. I wouldn't have been able to get it otherwise. What was so painful about being on my clinical internship was seeing these people and knowing exactly what they needed. They needed dialectical behavior therapy. They needed intensive treatment for a year. They needed DBT skills. And the wait list being 6 months long, and only for people who could pay. And that's not who these people were. So that very powerful experience drove me to become a researcher during my postdoc in a health system, so one of the Kaiser health systems in Seattle. And with the mind towards, okay, we will never have enough clinicians trained to provide the intensity of treatment that we need. And at the same time, the need is not going anywhere. And so the research project that I worked on at that time was developing a resource for people who had been suicidal and maybe wouldn't otherwise get access to support from DBT. So part of the research that I did was creating this public resource with a team of people who'd been suicidal, so that if somebody came to the ER and then was in the ICU and then was leaving without an inpatient hospitalization, that at least what I could do would be to give them a referral to this website. If I couldn't get them an appointment in the next few days, or if I wasn't sure they were going to show up to that appointment. So this public resource created is called nowmattersnow.org. And part of the vision that came out of that, or where that vision came from, was the suffering that I saw on my clinical internship. So when we'll talk about in a moment, there's this idea, or there's this research on the caring messages or caring contacts having such a powerful effect on people who are suicidal or really struggling with mental health issues. And so the way that I have sort of conceptualized delivering this public resource is by having it in the context of a caring message. So even if you met with somebody for 10 minutes, but you learned something personal about them, as a clinician, you would write a note to them on the back of this business card, essentially, a personalized business card, and on the other side is a reference, or is a link to the Now Matters Now website. The idea being there that there's something tangible you're walking away with, it's personalized, and it's giving you a resource that you can access for free anytime you want, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, whatever. So people could go to this website. I've mentioned this website. We're going to talk a little bit more about it, but the main point being that it was intentionally, the design was conducted by myself and people with lived experience. So people who had been suicidal, had multiple suicide attempts. We conceptualized this product. We built this product, and I mean free resource, with the support from American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and the National Institutes of Mental Health. We conceptualized it, we built it, and what it has is real people who've been suicidal talking about their stories and their personal experience and how they got through those. So that's it. I'll tell you more about it, but that's just a little bit about who I am.
Thank you. Thank you for that. In listening to you, I feel like I should give a shout out to my lab and Dr. Lisa Brenner, who has been a great mentor to me and has set up that same sort of lab where we're all in this together and we all have this common mission. So it's like passing this along to us. One of the things that you touch on here is the systems approach that and you use the phrase, we're all in this together. But it's more than just this all resting on my shoulders. It seems like it's something that much more than that. Can you tell us a little bit?
I think that being a clinician can actually be a fairly lonely experience because of the time commitments, because of the emotional energy that it takes, and because oftentimes our systems are not necessarily designed in a way where we create this atmosphere of mutual support and stepping up for each other when we need it, and then taking care of people when they're more burned out. And there's a lot of that stuff that dialectical behavior therapy has built in that we haven't yet figured out how to reimburse in the medical model, right? But this is absolutely what's needed to take care of the health of our clinicians. So one of the things I really love about this zero suicide approach, this systems approach to suicide prevention, is that it takes the responsibility off of the shoulders of the individual clinician and says, as a health system, hey, leadership is saying it's our responsibility to set the system up for your success. And if you're struggling, if you're seeing suicides, we need to give you the training that you need, the support that you need, and that's just what's done. It's not like something you have to think of afterwards that we should have done. It's part of the building of a zero suicide health system. It's there from the top, because can you imagine the trauma of a person experiences to get to the point where they kill themselves, and then there's this additional trauma that happens when somebody loses a patient to suicide, and they don't have the system around them to wrap themselves around and say, we're here for you. There's creating another trauma in that sense. So I appreciate the question.
So one of this idea that you also brought up is the idea of lived experience. And one of the things that we've done a few interviews now with folks with lived experience, and one of the things that keeps coming up, at least that I am hearing, is the collaboration, learning from this shared experience, this lived experience. Can you say a little bit more about that?
I mean, I think I and many people knew intuitively that we need to be present when something bad happens to somebody. But that's not what we were trained to do. Humans, for whatever reason, we step away for the most part when somebody is suffering intensely emotionally. And maybe this wasn't always the case, but for some reason this is what can happen. And I think the voice of lived experience, it's filling in a lot of the details that we were very fuzzy on, that maybe we thought were important, but then when you hear from the mouth of somebody who's been suicidal, your ears perk up and your memory holds on better. One of the things I think so powerful about the stories of lived experiences, I remember them, right? I mean, I can go to a talk and hear an hour of really valuable information, but if there are stories that are woven in, the likelihood of me remembering them increases tenfold. And so, there's a number of wonderful things about lived experience storytelling and valuing lived experience. And I think one of the things we're learning is that we need to acknowledge, and when we witness somebody sharing their lived experience or when they're going through some kind of very difficult event, that when somebody discloses, yes, I've had depression, or yes, I've had anxiety, even in a passing way, that we commit to ourselves to acknowledge that and to just say, hey, I noticed that you said that. Thank you for telling me that, right? To just acknowledge that it happened. I have a lovely person that I'm working with, and just the other day they mentioned, I'm going to my therapist appointment. I said, you never told me that. Thank you. I appreciate you mentioning that to me. Because when you're in that position of being uncertain about sharing information, you're paying really close attention to the response of the person you're telling it to. But the person that's being told to doesn't get that. Like, we don't know that we are being watched so closely for our response. What we may think is, I don't want to make that person who's disclosing uncomfortable, but that gives a certain body language that is not actually calming for the person who's sharing something that is sensitive or that is personal in a way that they haven't before. So I keep that rule. I think rules are really important. That rule, thank somebody when they tell you that they have had a mental health experience or they're going through something hard. Just like look at them and acknowledge, like, hey, thank you for telling me that, and then listen. So I appreciate that question about lived experience.
Thank you very much. We're here at the Bridging the Divide conference. You've got 2 sessions, keynote, and another session tomorrow, and you've got to get off to dinner. We could talk for quite a while longer, but any closing words you'd have. And I should say for our audience, we'll invite Ursula back another time. But any closing things you'd like to say?
I think so. Thank you, Joe. You've been so gracious. I think the power of carrying contacts and messages, I just feel like that cannot be understated. And so thinking of rules, right? The rule of acknowledging somebody when they've shared something. The rule here is to send a caring message. And my rule, and not in a negative, not in a punitive way, but my rule is to send a caring message every day. So that may be just because I notice them in my stream on Facebook. That might be just because they pop into my head. That might be because I'm consciously going to myself, which I try to do once a week. Try to go, who have I not heard from? Who has not been on Facebook but who used to be? Who has been more grumpy than usual, and then that's the person I send a caring message to. Not assuming that they're having a hard time and not saying you must be ill, but saying like, hey, I'm holding you in my mind. That's it. I'm just holding you in my mind. And that's all. So I think that's the most important thing I want to impart is to think of in your own life, your personal life, not just your clients. But I do challenge you to send caring messages to your clients. But in your personal lives, I challenge you to do that on a regular basis and to think about, to remember, as Shelby Rose says, that nobody suffers pretty. And so that person who's kind of being a pain in the butt may be the one who needs the caring message the most.
Well, that wraps it up for this week's Short Takes podcast. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to having you visit us again. In the meantime, think about giving us a review on Apple's iTunes, and we'll see you next time for more on Short Takes on Suicide Prevention.